Hi, Graham Vincent, violin maker and musician. So I haven't done a Q&A for a while. This summer I think most people feel like doing something different in the summer, and I've done fewer videos. I haven't done any Q&A for a while, so it's not that I don't want to do them anymore or anything, it's just that I felt like a bit of a change, and now I'm back making violins I've been making violins all the way through, obviously, but yeah, I feel like I've slightly recharged on that front. So someone was asking if I was going to do some more Q&As. I said I will, and I put a message out on the Violin Making a Discussion group, Facebook group, and I got some great questions back. In fact, there are 3 questions here which probably are enough to fill 3 or 4 different Q&A sessions, but we'll try and get through them all in this one go, shall we? So Brennan Arsenault sent this great question. Hi again from Louisiana. I watched a Japanese maker build a cello, and he assembled things way out of order. Ribs, linings, front, remove mould, fit and glue the neck. So he was able to set the neck with one fewer surface to have to get just right, and he could plane the base of the neck in line with the ribs after, if it was sticking out on the back, I guess. Just curious what you think of that. Have you ever tried something similar? Interesting. Okay. I mean, we all have our set ideas about what's good and bad, but I always try and avoid right or wrong. And you know, your perception of he assembled things out of order. It's only out of order from the commonly perceived order of things to do the construction of a violin or cello nowadays. But let's not forget that, you know, Stradivarius, Guarneri and all the others used to make the rib garland and then do it with using a butt joint, used to nail the neck in place. And that meant that they could then angle the neck and get it the way they wanted as they were sort of preparing the shape of the front and back plates. And it also meant when they were gluing them together, they could really, you know, move the thing around. And there certainly is quite a bit of evidence with Guarneri's violins that some of them are slightly distorted in shape, quite possibly because he was literally pushing the neck over to a better position than it might naturally want to settle. So in terms of doing things out of order, like I say, I kind of personally feel there is no right and wrong to all of this. There are various different ways of doing it. And in the same way that people play the violin differently, that people hold the bow differently, you know, makers should be allowed to find their own preferred methods of doing things. And the only way you're going to do that is obviously to try lots of different things. And this is what Brennan's doing here, is he's looking at this other method someone's using and wondering if there's anything positive there. And I'm sure there is. Personally, I intend to make at least 1 or 2 Baroque violins, and so I will certainly be fastening the neck very early on, in the same way that Guarneri or Stradivarius used to, and I expect to learn quite a bit from that. To go back to this question, I mean, in terms of how I put together a standard violin nowadays, I do tend to use the fairly common method of, you know, make the body first, put the neck on. Because actually, I don't find fitting the neck that difficult. I don't know why that is, whether I've just been lucky, maybe it's my particular approach, but to me, I mean, it's fairly straightforward. You know, you have to make a recess which is going to fit the end of the violin neck, and you have to, as you go, to make sure that the neck angle is absolutely correct and the alignment is correct, and also that it's not twisted, you know, that way. So yeah, a couple of things. That's got to be correct. That's got to be correct, and that's got to be correct. I hope the use of the hands helped, but anyway. And all of those things are fairly simply adjusted, you know, as long as you go very slowly, take it easy. So, yeah, interesting, really interesting. Doubtless I will be thinking about this over the next few weeks, as usual, and who knows, maybe I will change the order I put something together soon. Let's see. A wonderful question from Petri Tarka. Like I say, this is like, well, it's kind of two questions, and this is enough for a whole video. The 5 most important aspects to address when making a violin. Goodness gracious, what a difficult question. I'm just going to get an old violin. Hang on. So, the 5 most important things to address. Okay. First things first, you've got to remember that this is a tool for making music, and so it has to work as that tool. When you pick it up, I think the neck has to feel good under the hands, the strings have to be set in such a way that they play nicely, so your care and attention to the nut and the string height above the fingerboard, the radius on the fingerboard, the height of the strings above the fingerboard, further down the fingerboard. All of those things are really important. So the ergonomics of it, so that it feels like something you feel at home with fairly easily, or that you feel you can get to terms with fairly easily. Does that make sense? I'm waffling a bit here. So what I'm saying is, it's a tool, and it must feel workable, and it must feel pleasant to hold and to play. So that's what I would say is number 1. Make it work as that tool for making music. Secondly, it's a tool for making music. Make it work in terms of sound. So I think, point 1, we've said it's got to play well. You've got to feel at home, and it's got to do what you expect it to do. 2, it's got to sound good, and getting that to happen obviously involves a lot of stuff. So, the weight of the violin overall, the density of the timbre, the way it's put together, the types of glue you use, the thickness of the plates, all of those things, the angle, the height of the bridge, how much of a break angle the strings have over there. All of those things sort of feed into that. And they're all kind of important, but the one overarching goal is make it sound good. So that would be point 2 for me. Then I think we're starting to get onto less important stuff. I mean, number 1, make it feel great and play the way you want it to play. Number 2, make it sound great. Number 3, it's got to look good, because if people don't love the instrument, they won't pick it up and they won't play it. So, it's got to feel good, it's got to sound good, but it's got to look good. So you've got to look at it and go, I love this violin. I want to play this violin. And where do you start? There's the shape of the arching is a big one for me. The actual form of the arching, and the form of the body and the curves and so on. Those are important things for me. The varnish, of course, how it looks is really important. And you could break it down into some smaller sort of parts as well. I mean, things like how the scroll looks, how the scroll's cut. Actually, can I add something to point 1 as well? Maybe this is a separate point. The tuning pegs should work really nicely. So you should, tuning with pegs, with traditional pegs, is something a lot of people find hard. But if it's well set up, they should work reasonably well. So that's an important point. Am I up to point 4 now, or should we call that point 5? Point 4, I would say, is form and actual your own statement about the shape of the thing and so on. So this is an old German body which I repaired and put a new neck on, and I haven't finished it yet, obviously. But this has got fairly standard corners, and you see many sort of amateur violins where people have kind of gone a bit wild on the corners sometimes, and they can end up being quite chunky, you know, quite thick, quite wide, or sometimes quite long. And if that's what you want to do, you know, then who is to say you're wrong? But in terms of if you want it to appeal to a greater number of people, you don't want to surprise people, then maybe you should kind of have a look at what standard form is and maybe pull yours slightly in that direction. And I'm not saying we should all make exactly the same violin. I really don't mean that at all. You know from listening to me talk previously that I'm very much in favour of variation and so on. So if you know, if the corners are something you're doing the way you want to and you're happy with it, whoopee-doo, that is fantastic. If, however, you're, you know, slightly unhappy about the way the corners are, then have a look at some of the violins you really love. Go online, have a look at those Stradivarius corners, which are just beautiful. There's at the Ashmolean Museum, there's a violin called, well, which is known as the Amati Allard, which many people think is one of the most beautiful violins, and that has got quite fine and quite long corners. And it is quite beautiful. So, you know, those corners, and part of the same point is the form and shape. You know, point number 4, the form and the shape of the F holes as well, I would say, comes in under that. The form and the shape of the arching is also, for me, is falls into that category, and the execution of the scroll, which again, you just got to. The scroll, to me, all the lines should kind of flow, and when you know you've got a nice looking scroll, it's kind of when it actually, it doesn't have a good side. So you don't look at the front and go, oh, that's lovely, but then you look round the back and think, it should, the line should work from, you know, almost any angle, if that makes sense. Point five. Most important. What is going to be the most important? Point 5. Gosh. Do you know what? I think I've covered it all, really. Yeah. Yeah, point 5. This is a bit of an odd one. But for me, point 5 is to remember that it is a tool, as I said, in points 1 and 2. And as such, the worst thing I think that can happen to a violin is for it to be stuck in a cupboard forevermore. So I'm always very, very happy when my violins get into the hands of a player who I know is going to play them. So point 5 for me, if you're making a violin, is to actually sort of try and get it into the hands of someone who's going to play it, even if you have to give it to them. It doesn't matter. Being able to hear your creation playing music is an absolutely wonderful thing. So, yeah, Petri, that's a fantastic question. And then you've asked another one. 5 best tools to make the journey easier. Oh, good grief. Yeah, a limited number of wonderful gouges, definitely. There. Good sharpening equipment. That, you know, yes, that should have been number 1 on the list. Good sharpening stuff. And nowadays you don't have to spend a huge amount of money on that. One thing the third is a good jointing plane, a good block plane, and at least 1 or 2 well sorted little thumb planes. I think those are absolutely essential. 4, good measuring stuff. Yeah, good measuring things. You need. I use a sort of dial calipers or gauges, I don't know what you call them, and I use. I've got a meter rule, a 12-inch rule, and a 6-inch rule, but nice ones that you can read easily. Things that make think number 4 on the list, the sort of tools that I find myself using more than anything else. I know this is going to seem a really stupid one, but a really nice sharp saw is something that I use a lot. I do a lot of hand sawing rather than band sawing. I've only got a small band saw, which I love as a tool, great. So I do a lot of the heavier work by hand, and yeah, a nice modern, what make is this one? Irwin. It's an Irwin, sort of a hardened point saw. It's a fantastic bit of kit, superb. And the last one, what best tools to make the journey easier? Ooh, a good vice. Definitely a good vice. That's probably should have been one of the most important ones on the list. And then Petri has, he's really knocked the ball out of the park here on the questions front. His third question: what tools should be good quality, and on which can you buy the cheaper ones? Okay. Don't get cheap chisels. Don't get cheap gouges. Get second-hand ones if you want, but don't get cheap ones. You do better to have a very small number of really lovely sort of gouges and chisels. Do not get a cheap block plane. Get the best block plane you can buy within reason. I mean, a well-fettled Stanley or record is fine. Yeah, I mean, back to the jointing plane again. That's a critical tool for making your work good. Then things you can get away with. And nowadays, you know, the sort of I sharpen using a diamond plate that I just bought off eBay, and it wasn't much at all. I use very cheap violin making planes. Again, it's just a question of setting them up properly. I you know, in this workshop, I think I own 3 or 4 cramps and clamps. That's it. Because I use, no, that doesn't count the spool clamps for fastening bodies together, but almost everything else I do with. Just bear with me. Yeah, so I mean, I don't spend much money on clamps and things. I use obviously these for putting the bodies together. You can make your own if you want. They're not expensive. These are incredibly useful. Clothes pegs with rubber bands. Some people use the little more powerful, I think they're sheep castrating bands actually, because the sort of typical rubber bands sort of perish and fade over time. I made a couple of these up for gluing the neck on. These are surprisingly useful. 2 bits of wood, a little bit of cork, rubber band, bit of wood there. You can imagine if you slide that pivot point there, then they're very easy to use. If you slide the pivot away from there, the force on the end is much more than it was. So yeah, I use these for putting on bass bars. Literally just scrap wood and rubber bands. Knives. I mean, this probably won't come as a major surprise to anyone who's watched any of my videos, because you've probably seen me, you know, making some of these knives. The 2 knives that I use most of all, those 2, are just wood screws. And then I do actually use this knife quite a bit, and this was an eBay special bridge knife, but for some reason it works really nicely indeed. The only real more expensive violin making knife I've got is this one. I don't really use that much. Oh, and back to the subject of saws quickly. I saw a chap called Aaron using one of those in a video he did, and it's a Japanese plumber's saw, I believe, and it is just the most amazing thing. It really is. I do also love some of these Japanese, more traditional Japanese saws. They're great. So, yeah, my American Irwin saw and those two Japanese ones. Yeah, those are all kind of near the top of quality range. They're good. Scrapers, most of the ones I have I made myself, and they all work very well, largely from old saws. Yeah, anyway, I think that answers that one. That was a great question. I love that question. Yeah. And then last question I'm going to tackle from Wolfie Fiddler. I'm not a maker, but I'd like to know how you assess what woods to use for your instruments. You use a great variety of unusual timbers, but always end up with a great sounding violin, so I'd be interested in what guides your choices. Very simple. It's got to look good. Well, that's important. It's got to be a reason for using it. To me, the better sounding violins tend to be lighter violins, so whilst a lot of that is down to how you make the thing, it's also down to the density of the timber. So, you know, a slightly less dense timber would be good. But the biggest, by far, thing that guides me is is it resonant or not? So I've got here, you know, a fairly boring looking piece of softwood, spruce, which I will use for violin blocks, but if you tap it, you very quickly realise that it's a very resonant piece of wood, and that for me is number one on the list. It should ring, it should sound like it wants to be part of a xylophone. Because if it just absorbs energy and goes thud, then it will rob the energy that you're putting into the violin. It'll be absorbed and it won't resonate. It won't send it out. And that's been a really important guiding principle in my choice of timber since day one. In fact, I think it was violin number 8. I purposefully, because I was scratching around for timber to use in a workshop, I purposefully put together a violin using good looking timber that didn't resonate, that I was suspicious of, and it did confirm everything I thought, because it wasn't a terribly good sounding violin. It just felt lackluster in many ways. So it reinforced my my thinking on that one. I hope that helps. It's as simple as that. Does it resonate? Do I like it? Do I want to use it? Does it resonate? Yes. Then it's going to be fine. Yeah, so there we are. Not sure how long this has been, but I think that's fine. I don't want to waffle on and on. Thanks for listening. Like and subscribe and all that sort of YouTube stuff. Yeah, look after yourselves. Cheers, folks. Bye.